everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Last session of the day. I'm really looking forward to it. My name is Sally. I'm not going to introduce myself straight away because we're going to get to that in a second. But firstly, I want to thank you for coming to what is probably like the weirdest, most niche session, I would like to think, on the calendar for this conference. It's a pretty unusual use case for Unreal Engine. But I'm really hoping that despite the fact I'm doing something niche, there's actually some takeaways for people across a whole bunch of different disciplines because I'm working with a whole bunch of different elements of Unreal. So before I kick off, I actually just wanted to get to know you really quickly, and hopefully I'll be able to tailor a little bit of the content based on who's actually here in the room. So feel free to put your hand up more than once because I'm sure there's some very multidisciplinary people here. But firstly, is anyone here working in virtual production in that context? Yep, solid. Yes, great. What about like animation sort of pipelines? Yeah, cool, animating and editor, great. What else? Game development? A lot of people, awesome. Has anyone worked with motion capture data before? Yeah, also solid cross-section. Okay, so I guess I'm working across all of those things, but in a very niche way, but I'm really hoping there's takeaways for people. The way that this session is kind of going to run is a little bit different. We're at the end of the day, so instead of spending like 15, 20 minutes trying to explain myself and what I'm doing, what this project is, I'm actually going to kick off with a documentary. This is not online. It is not something that you can just watch. Only a handful of people in the world have seen this, and it kind of details what this project is, who is behind it, and also like why, the why of like why I'm making this project, but also why you might think about using Unreal Engine for live performance. It also talks to a bunch of different practitioners across Australia who are not here today, how they're using Unreal in their performances. So that's 20 minutes long. It's going to kick us off, and hopefully we'll all be on the same page from then, and we can get into some of the fun, nitty-gritty stuff. So I've not had a chance yet to talk about some of the technical things behind the show. So I'm going to go into like networking Unreal Engine, especially when it comes to live link data and motion capture data. I also want to briefly touch on like NDI and why you might use that with end display or instead of end display. So yeah, plenty of nitty-gritty technical things. And then also, I hopefully will get a bit of time to talk about like the creative big picture of like how to still tell stories and think about your audience. And really the reason we're all here in the first place is just make cool stuff for other people. I also want to mention that the fact there's a lot of stuff that I can't fit into this session. So here's just a list of some of the things I won't touch on in the session itself. A lot of other things as well in terms of, you know, using the take recorder and layering sequences and dubbing faces onto live mocap and weird things that I'm doing with this. So I'm going to try and leave plenty of time at the end for questions. And hopefully if there's something on this list that strikes your interest, or if there's something that comes up in either the short documentary or while I'm talking that is relevant to you, then please make a mental note and we'll try and get to it at the end. But with that in mind, let's hit play on this 20-minute documentary. It's a lot of fun. There's a few people in the room who you'll see in the documentary, which is exciting. But it shows the very early test run beginnings of this particular project. So yeah, I'll hit play on that and then I'll pop back up soon.
There's something about live and the experience of watching something in the moment that humans really relate to.
I love playing live. I love seeing a real audience there responding to your songs and dancing and looking at you.
I've been jealous for a long time that musicians can get together and, you know, they jam, but in visual effects, traditionally, you're working at a glacial pace.
It's about getting that instantaneous feedback from the audience that something's working.
You're always on the edge of your seat waiting to see if something's going to go right, something's going to go wrong.
There's so many things that could go wrong.
Hi, I'm Sally Coleman. I'm a musician who started out performing in a rap duo called Code of Conduct. We toured with festivals and had songs on the radio, then ended up as radio presenters ourselves, eventually hosting Triple J Breakfast in 2020. But I also love sci-fi and fantasy, so when I chose to finish up on Triple J, I decided to create a fictional band called Big Sand. I wrote the songs with some of my favourite Aussie artists. All the lead characters are kind of coming up to the Shadowlands, I guess, of this world. But I had no idea how I was going to bring the characters to life.
And that's when I heard about this idea of motion capture.
So motion capture is a way of getting a representation of the body and its movement in digital space. It's a form of digital puppetry. We use suits, and basically there's a bunch of calculations and data that they spit out to the computer, and then that can move these kind of 3D objects in a virtual environment.
So I bought myself a motion capture suit, downloaded some animation software called Unreal Engine, and just started figuring it out from my bedroom. At first I assumed that Big Sand wouldn't be able to perform live, but as I got more confident using motion capture, I started to rethink that.
So I've found a performance at the Sydney Opera House where dancers in Hong Kong and here in Sydney are going to perform with each other using motion capture. And I'm going to go meet the crew behind it.
The show is Liu Yang Doku, the Binary World. Essentially, it works like a multiplayer game. We have a dancer in Sydney and a dancer in Hong Kong interacting in real time across a shared network.
So it's like a partner dance that then joins to become one body across the two locations of Sydney and Hong Kong.
I think once we really make that apparent that this is live, you can feel the audience it's like that pin drop moment where they're like, there's all these other people on the other side of the world watching this at the same time. You can watch something at home, but when you're sitting in a room with a group of people watching someone perform, that whole experience is just sort of elevated.
What if a virtual band is actually an opportunity to think about live music differently? I love playing live, but to reach audiences, you need to tour. For me, this starts out being fun, but it can leave me feeling exhausted and isolated. And a lot of musicians say that touring has a negative impact on their mental and physical health. It's also becoming more risky and expensive to tour. In recent years, cancellations have been more and more common. Plus, travel makes up an estimated 74% of the music industry's carbon emissions. But despite this, physical live music events are important and people love them. So what if I could tour, but from home? To test this out, I was going to need some help.
So, why are we here? What are we doing? Sally has this fantastic idea that she's started this new band and she wants to do something different with it. So she's gone Gorillaz-esque and is going to have a fully animated band, which is great if we just work in the world of straight kind of 2D, 3D animation, but she's far more ambitious than that, so she wants to do it live, create a live show.
At the moment, I am here at the Flinders University Drama Centre in somewhere called The Void. So this is a motion capture stage. It's got a whole bunch of infrared cameras around that pick up the reflection of these little knobbles on my Velcro suit. And these are all the data points that are used to animate a virtual character.
I reached out to The Void with an idea for a virtual gig in a physical venue, and the team here, Cam and Jason, have been super supportive. An animation studio have made a music video for Big Sand, and because it was made in Unreal Engine, I can reuse all those assets for the live show. I'm also working with music director Joel Farland on the audio. So I have all these great partners, and I'm going to need them because in just 12 weeks' time, I'm booked in to perform live for a real audience. The thing is, I am struggling to bring everything together and figure out what tech I'm actually going to need. So I've reached out to Michaela.
My name is Michaela Ledwidge and I'm the co-founder of Mod, which is a Sydney-based studio that specialises in real-time and virtual production. So when I met the Big Sand team, I proposed that we do a facilitated workshop to put together a high-level design for the show. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. So we're just going to jump straight in. We have a vested interest in seeing this project work because there's very few examples in this part of the world working on this. In this area where you can be using a lot of complex technology and there's typically too many options, it's really important for all the creative and technical collaborators to be really clear on what the through lines are.
For me, it's like locking down what compromises do I make? What's the middle ground between this being a tech testing project and this being a creative show for audiences?
The technology for me, is it worth doing if the audience can't tell what's going on?
This comes back to the question of how do you know it's live?
If we can stream mocap and have a live audience viewing it and reacting to it, that's our big plus point.
Yeah.
What's awesome for an audience is asking a question to a virtual character, that virtual character answers back.
Otherwise, you can just put a big video on and not.
So yes, you want
So
live.
yes,
Okay, cool.
live-
Because
Live talking,
yeah.
important, and specifically scripting things that make it really, really clear to the audience that
Yes.
it is live.
I'm definitely interested in the live aspect of this. You're not just looking at an animated film, it's an opportunity to form that connection with the audience.
The workshop helped me realize that I needed to interact with the audience so that they knew the show was live. But I'd never seen that done before in a motion capture performance. Then I heard about a kids' workshop that was running at Sydney Opera House.
Welcome to the Sydney Opera House and our motion capture music video workshop. I'm going to do the movements that you've made up, and I want you to tell me afterwards if we've actually created a story in there using the animation.
Oh my gosh, it's so silly. Like sometimes I catch myself, like I can see the little avatar moving and I'm like entertaining myself. I can like see myself, and then it's really fun to explore the outer edges of that weird body that's not your own.
With all this technology, things go wrong. This is Karina. She's here just to make sure to fix my suit. Don't forget, if something goes wrong, you got to tell me.
That would be my number one, is like, don't be a perfectionist, like be a performer, be engaged with your character and your audience first and foremost, and then things will mess up and you'll deal with them as they come.
I didn't realise that they were actually experimenting quite a lot with motion capture. I think I learned a lot from that and got some ideas as well for how I could engage with an audience in character. So the show is in 1 week and there's still so much that I need to do. The thing about the live show is like only 2 minutes of it are actually going to be live. That's sort of for the prototype what we're testing. But that means that the remaining like 10 to 15 minutes have to be like pre-recorded. So at the moment I'm putting together like a little animated sequence for each section of the show, like the walk on, the intro, the first song, the interlude, all that.
I've done as much work as I can in my bedroom, and the show is in just a few days. So I'm back in Adelaide, I'm animating a few last things, but mostly I need to test how the live streaming part of the performance is actually going to work. Here's the plan. I want to test out this idea of a remote virtual music gig. So we're going to stream my performance from the Void at Flinders University, 13.5 kilometres across town, to a place called Light. Here, there's a music room called The Lab with immersive LED walls. In both locations, I'll run Unreal Engine, which is game development software that lets you build virtual worlds and animate characters. In the Void, I'll use motion capture and Unreal to perform live as an avatar. I'll use Ableton Live to put some effects on my voice. And now I'm able to process my voice and sound like this. And use a virtual camera in Unreal to stream that performance into a Microsoft Teams call. At Light, virtual cameras in the same Unreal Engine project will send 6 different video feeds to the surrounding LED panels. I'll need to line these up manually to make it feel seamless. Remember, a lot of the show still uses pre-recorded content, so Ableton will trigger the animations that match each song and interlude.
It gets the OSC and it's like, is it MIDI note A, B, C, D?
I'll need to see and hear the audience too.
All we need is the feed from Light as well.
That's another video call showing the room and streaming a microphone back to the Void. When it's time for the live part of the show, we're going to switch from the pre-recorded animation to the video feed of my live performance. And hopefully it'll be smooth sailing from there.
Working with these kind of technologies, there's such an element of risk on our part of like whether it will actually work.
I feel like I spend honestly about 80% of my professional life with something going wrong.
A few days out from the show and plenty of things are going wrong.
It just crashed the first time I opened it, so fingers crossed that's not a theme. But if you're happy for me, the only things I want to test is, can I open the Ableton project and hit play and it triggers everything right?
I'm kind of still trying to learn to use like programming and blueprints in Unreal Engine while I'm actually putting the show together.
It should go to night. That's one thing that should happen when I hit play. So let's find out.
I've got all these different audio and video streams, and one of the big challenges is latency and getting everything to sync up.
Hey, be good if we can get the feed working so I can be like, was it okay? So anyone who's even just tried to do a Zoom call knows that that's hard enough. So trying to add in live streaming, mocap and audio, there's plenty that can go wrong there. Cool, I can talk to you in character, that's cool. Yeah, there's plenty of things I'm worried about, but I think the biggest thing that might go wrong is something I just haven't foreseen and haven't planned for.
So it's the day of the show. We've solved most of the big problems, but
It says that the subscription is in progress rather than that it's active. So I'm not, neither of those things I think are particularly helpful.
No.
the license just expired on Facer, which is the program that captures my facial movements.
All week it's been working perfectly all week, and then that.
I feel like I'm in my element, you know? When something's going wrong, I feel like, oh, phew, you know? Like, this is how it was supposed to play out. When nothing's going wrong, I'm suspicious. I'm waiting for something to jump out of the bushes.
I think what was a discovery for me, which is how much potential there is when the technology goes wrong, again, if you don't freak out. Being ready to adapt to the situation is an absolute must.
I was just doing a pre-made face animation. I can just have her mouth moving.
I know, exactly.
It just won't be in sync. Well, I've got that mouth, Jason. Ow! Wow, wow, wow!
Oh, I've just made a quick animation for the mouth, but it means that it won't actually track my face. And yeah, audience is arriving.
Yeah, maybe just an extra 10 minutes. The one thing I haven't had a chance to do is actually rehearse what I'm gonna say. I'm so busy like fixing audio. Room is live. This is the second chorus of this one, so we're gonna go live in soon. I don't know. There's some funky stuff happening with the audio, but I'll leave you to watch the Discord for any updates. I'm going to take this off unmute and we're gonna go quiet in the room, and then I'm gonna go 3, 2, 1. We've traveled a really long way, and I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous.
I didn't know exactly its name.
I can see someone sitting here wearing a black shirt and black pants. Where have you traveled from?
The audience can see me, but my audio starts dropping out and I'm not sure whether or not they can hear me.
I can't hear you. Where have you traveled from? Oh, can anybody hear me? Give me a wave.
Oh, hello, there's someone who looks at the front. Where have you traveled from?
Hi. Hello, where have you traveled from?
Where have you traveled from?
The voice effects also aren't doing me any favors. So I fall back on an old faithful from my hip hop days and get everyone to put their hands up.
I just want you to put your hands in the air. Like this. Yeah? Beautiful. Now I want us to go this way first. Oh, that's great. And then how about this way? Oh, you guys are good at this. But I'm going to tell you a very important story.
I'd also run out of time to plan some kind of show communication system like a radio. It meant that no one had any way to communicate with me while the microphone was on.
Am I muted? I'm not going to be on right now. Can you tell them to hit play on Unreal?
And that meant that I didn't know when to stop dancing.
Oh, okay. It's good, it's good, it's good. Thank you so much for coming.
That was the first time we've ever tried that. I think it's the first time anyone in the world has ever tried that. And what I would love
from you, I guess, is thoughts, feedback, what the performance is like from your end.
So, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but yeah, it was all fairly seamless up until the point you did the first piece where you're trying to speak to us and your audio was breaking up.
When I ran down the front, I thought, okay, maybe I couldn't quite communicate because I couldn't hear you, but I felt maybe we were trying to.
All the songs executed really well. I thought they were great. These folks were up and dancing.
And I just want to say thank you again so much for coming to see something very unpredictable and experimental.
and supporting music and arts and tech and local venues. Really appreciate it.
Yay! Well, well.
I think
Maybe
that
I
it
got
switched earlier than you thought it did. And you were just doing this, thinking you were still on it.
What's going on?
But they'd actually gone, we just switched to the wall.
It's always the unknowns, isn't it? So that's the problem whenever you try new tech is you don't never know exactly which bits are going to work as you plan, and the bits that you spent all the time getting concrete then fall over, what the alternatives are.
Like, I was trying to talk to the audience, they obviously weren't hearing me, they were looking blank. Someone just stood up from the back and walked up right to the front and just waved at me. And I was like, thank you. They could see that the animated character was nervous and struggling on stage. I think that's a checkbox in, did you build a relationship with this animated person on the wall? Because they saw me really struggling to communicate and responded and did something about it. Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.
We have a lot of work to go. It's not where it needs to be just yet, but all of that development can only come with the input of our audience. Like, there's a certain level of planning where you can only go so far, and then you have to accept the wild card that is the introduction of the audience, because they're going to shift what you do.
I don't feel like I succeeded in actually making the production of a show like this more affordable than getting on a plane. Because right now the upfront costs have been really high, like, owning a motion capture suit or having access to a university or a studio. If there were more artists doing the same thing, the cost would come down because there'd be more equipment, more trained people, more venues.
I guess open source ways of establishing stuff like this, but motion capture technology is still fairly young.
Artists aren't typically doing it because they can't see it having been done before.
But with investment and with people jumping on board and with that kind of infrastructure and skills like around the country, it could be there.
The reason that we're here, like, capturing human movement to put into an animation is because it's human.
It's messy and fun.
It's playful. It still feels
Yes,
very
that's
playful and experimental.
I don't know where it's going precisely, but
yeah,
I think that's up to a lot of us.
So it's been so much harder than I thought. But the whole point is, I feel like you need to do these kind of laborious first steps in that direction to turn it into an easy experience. I also don't think I ever really expected to get this far, in a weird way.
I think there's a bit of a trap to try and replicate everything that we have in terms of a physical gig. And I think the opportunity is to really lean into what makes a virtual gig special.
So I'm here at the UTS Data Arena, and I've been spending a lot of time here recently. I've started a PhD in motion capture for a remote live performance, and I've also just pulled off the very first full-length Big Sound live show where I managed to send motion capture data to the venue instead of streaming video.
And the crazy thing is that despite all of this, I feel like I'm really only just getting started, stepping into this world, and I don't know, I'm excited to see what's next.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. Thanks for watching that. Honestly, I feel like it's just easier to show rather than tell sometimes. And I also really wanted to bring in some of the context of what I'm trying to do and show you some other performances that are happening and give you a bit of the why as well. So just going back to, I guess, what's happening in this session is hopefully now we're on the same page of who I am, what I'm doing, what the context is in Australia, and those very first baby steps of this particular performance. So what I want to talk about now are some of my biggest technical takeaways since then, and also some of the more general things I've learned about storytelling and interaction design. Most of that documentary was recorded nearly 2 years ago, which means that a lot has changed since then. The biggest and most important change is obviously my hair. But since this very first sort of tiny experimental test run, a lot of other things have changed about the way that I've developed and delivered the show as well. So since that first beta test, I don't know how to hit play on this thing, but it's just a little loop. Can you hit play on it there? Yeah, thanks. I performed the show 2 more times. So the first full-length 40-minute live show was here at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, where I was performing from the UTS data arena, and some of the things stayed the same about the show. So at the moment, the entire show runs out of the Unreal Engine editor. And that means if the editor crashes, the show is over. When I tell that to musicians, they're like, oh, okay. And when I tell that to developers, they're like, so that's a big thing. The overall architecture of the show is it's basically a series of cinematic sequences. I, at the moment, trigger those sequences using MIDI notes. For non-musicians, a MIDI note is like the kind of base unit of electronic music. It sends your velocity and your pitch. So the pitch of the note I send to Unreal Engine just triggers a particular cinematic sequence. And that means I can use anything from a keyboard to a foot pedal to Ableton Live to send different triggers that are linked to the music into Unreal Engine. So yeah, now that's a 40-minute show, and it alternates between sequences that still have mostly pre-recorded content and then real-time live content where I'm in the motion capture suite interacting with the audience. The reason I've still kept some of that pre-recorded animation in there is just because I still don't entirely trust the internet and networking, and it does mean that if some parts of the show fall over, I've still got something that I can show the audience. So it's more of a fallback. As I get more confident, I think with some of those pipelines, I can start to pull more and more pre-existing elements out of the show and replace them with real-time live elements. The other show that I did was a short performance as part of Real Time Live at SIGGRAPH Asia, where I ran an interactive karaoke session with the audience, and we won the Critics' Choice and the Audience Choice Awards for that. So take that in video. That is me performing the show in the data arena at UTS, and shout out as well to Emma Smith, who is at the conference. She was the technical director for that particular performance. So what has changed about the show? We talked about some of the things that are similar. It's still running out of Unreal. It still involves cinematic sequences as sort of the basic framework. But what's different now is that it is a network performance, like I mentioned in the documentary. So Microsoft Teams is gone. Hooray. My VTuber era is over. I am no longer streaming video. I'm also using NDI. So I'm going to talk about these 2 things in a little bit more depth in this presentation. But I also want to briefly touch on the bottom 2 things. So sorry if I'm standing in the way for anyone. But I'm using 3 different kinds of motion capture data now, not out of choice, just out of what I've kind of got available to me. So I'm just using now an iPhone X with Live Link Face, which a lot of people would be maybe familiar with for just animating blend shapes on a character. It's very popular with VTubers because it's free. My body, I'm using OptiTrack Motive, and OptiTrack Motive doesn't have amazing hand and finger tracking. So I'm also using Rococo, just inertial gloves, and sending that information over Wi-Fi to my laptop. So 3 different kinds of mocap data, which means I've had to learn a lot about some different solutions to networking all 3 of those options. I've also, because I've taken video out of the equation, have been able to get some really low latency audio. My audio streaming is now under 20 milliseconds, and as a comparison, that's about the amount of time it takes my voice to travel to the back of this room. So pretty much unnoticeable in terms of like the latency reduction that I've managed to get with the performance, especially at SIGGRAPH. So yeah, network performance, biggest difference. And what you saw is, yeah, that I'm now sending my motion capture data and those show triggers, those like MIDI notes and things directly into the engine at the venue. The only exception to that is when I appear at the end of the performance and do like that Wizard of Oz kind of moment wearing the motion capture suit and just explain to the audience what they just watched. So what you're seeing here is me appearing at the end of my performance at SIGGRAPH Asia and talking to the audience, explaining that my motion capture data here is actually arriving before the video, making it look like my avatar is puppeting me and not the other way around. And considering that I'm sending a really low quality video here, I'm sending it via Video Ninja, which is like a very fast way of video streaming. You can see that this actually does have quite a big effect on reducing latency. And that's very important when I'm trying to have a two-way conversation with an audience. This also lets me have much higher resolution visuals because they're being, played straight out of the engine on site. I'm not having to stream any video. So yeah, this solution I think is definitely a lot better for what I'm trying to do with the show. And I think the idea of like being able to network things in Unreal Engine is potentially actually useful in some virtual production contexts as well. So how am I sending motion capture data over the network? Well, I needed to find a solution to this question. Come on. That was a virtual network. So I couldn't just have like a 20-kilometer long Ethernet cable, obviously. I needed to be able to have multiple devices on that same network, so my iPhone, laptop, PC, all kind of joined together virtually. It needed to be really fast, so ideally like a peer-to-peer solution. It needed to be free or like indie level cheap. And it also needed to be like easy to use, especially for a non-coder, non-network engineer person like me. Like I've literally never torrented anything because it seems too intimidating. So this is ZeroTier. ZeroTier is my new best friend. There is a free tier of this. It is pretty well trusted and very well documented. A lot of major organizations use it. You can install it on most devices, including a smartphone, and then add them straight away to a virtual network. So all of your devices essentially have like an imaginary Ethernet cable between them. This means that if I open up like LiveLink Face and I punch in the right virtual IP address, I can send my face data in real time to my PC, running Unreal Engine, anywhere in the world. When it can, ZeroTier finds peer-to-peer connections, so you can get really fast data instead of going via that central server, which adds latency, especially in Australia where you don't always know where that server is. The main issue with this approach with ZeroTier as a solution is that institutions don't like it. It's not entirely true. A lot of institutions actually do use ZeroTier or similar like wide area networking solutions. But, cybersecurity policies, installing software that gets you around organization firewalls meant that I couldn't install this, for example, on university machines or at the Powerhouse Museum. And I want to take a second to say that these kinds of blocks, like policies, procedures, and people and personalities, sometimes we kind of think of them as distractions that get in the way of like the real problem solving, which is technical problem solving. And we have big conferences like this that are all about like technical solutions to our problems. But in reality, I think that looking at these sorts of things like policies, there are real problems, and technical pipelines always need to take into consideration like your real life factors, like who you're going to be working with, what policies are in place, what they're going to let you do, and what you can install on machines. So the pipeline that I've created for the show is really less about what you can do in Unreal Engine and more how you can creatively use Unreal Engine to work around all of the roadblocks that get thrown in your way when you're working on a budget or you're trying to collaborate with a third party and all those sorts of things. So that is why I want to briefly introduce you to my favorite tick box in Unreal Engine. This tick box is a LiveLink feature. Does anyone else in the room use LiveLink? Yeah, a few people. So LiveLink, again, mostly used for motion capture data, but any kind of live data can kind of come through there. Has anyone ever used this tick box? Yeah, 2 people. Awesome. What do you guys use it for? Virtual production? Yeah, like on a motion capture stage, for example. For filming. Okay, cool. So there is minimal documentation on this girl, but she is my hero. Yeah. Look, this feature I think is designed for people mostly working with live link data on like a virtual production stage or over like multi-user editor, I think is maybe one of the main reasons that it exists in the first place. And that's normally a situation where you have multiple instances of Unreal, but they're all running the same project, and you want everyone using the same project to see the same data. But this tick box also works really well in completely different instances of Unreal Engine that are running completely different projects that happen to be linked even over a virtual network. So that means that when I have ZeroTier on and I tick this box, every device that's running Unreal Engine on my network can see my mocap data in live link by choosing the message bus source. So essentially what you're seeing here is just a screenshot from my laptop. My desktop is called Sally Smooth. And this just lets me bring in the motion capture data from a completely different device, like anywhere in the world. Random side note, this doesn't work with Rococo, unfortunately. So if anyone uses Rococo, feel free to talk to me about that, but I won't go into it now. But why was this rebroadcast feature handy? So what you're seeing here is a rough, not entirely exact diagram of what happens in the data arena during the performance. So each of these different colors, it's a little hard to see with this contrast, but each of these different colors is a different device. On the top right is the PC running OptiTrack Motive, which is the motion capture software. It's licensed, blah, blah, blah. It's a university machine, and that meant that I couldn't just install ZeroTier and blast my mocap data out to the network to be received on site by, the machine running the show. But what I could do is join the local network on my own device, just using the Wi-Fi or an Ethernet cable. Then I'd receive that motion capture data locally. So you can see in the orange in the center, it's not very orange, it's kind of like a baby poo color. In the middle, this is my laptop running Unreal Engine. I'd receive that motion capture data. Just running a totally empty Unreal Engine project, there's nothing happening in it except for live link, where I can tick that rebroadcast box, and that lets me multicast my motion capture data using ZeroTier. It's picked up by Unreal Engine on site in the performance space. Performance space, same disclaimer, this is not entirely accurate, but here's a venue diagram of the Powerhouse show. So I'm not going to go into detail on these diagrams, but you can see on the top left, I'm receiving UDP data from a bunch of different devices. So there is an iPhone, there is a Mac, there is a PC. You can follow this train of thought and essentially integrate whatever kind of inputs you want into Unreal from anywhere in the world. You can do some of this already with remote control. Side note, ZeroTier also works with remote control, so you can control like anything in the engine from anywhere by setting up a virtual network like this. The other thing you might notice here is that there's a lot of NDI and OBS popping up. So can I get another show of hands? Anyone who already uses NDI or is just familiar with what it does? Yeah, again, some virtual production people. Essentially, NDI, I don't know, how does it work? I have no idea. Don't ask me. Don't at me. I don't know how it works. But what it does is it lets you share video over a network. And that seems really niche, but it's obviously really important when you need to get something in Unreal onto a really big screen so that the audience can see it. As a side note, NDI does work over ZeroTier or a virtual network, but I'm not really sure it's meant to be used like that, and that's not how I'm using it. I'm literally just using it to get visuals out of Unreal Engine at the venue to the audience, so on projectors, on an LED wall, and most recently I've also been using it to get visuals of the audience into Unreal. So here's the scene from my performance at SIGGRAPH Asia, where a roaming camera is showing an audience volunteer called Larry, who is leading the room in a karaoke session. Shout out again to Emma Smith, who wasn't just the show director, but the technical artist for this hologram effect. And essentially, using this hologram effect, we could just toggle the base materials between my camera feed of me in a motion capture suit in a remote location and Larry in the room, both coming in via NDI. So essentially just like switch that stuff into Unreal, add some cool material stuff to make it look like it belonged in the scene, and in that way like integrate all kinds of fun video data into Unreal and kind of use it however we wanted. So the plugin that I use to make NDI interfacing with Unreal Engine really easy is called Offworld Live. It's just available on the marketplace. Again, VTubers love this thing. There is heaps of stuff of Twitch streamers changing the outfits that they're wearing or switching between cameras and all sorts of stuff. You just pop a virtual camera into your level and can choose to send whatever that camera sees out to the network, to an NDI feed, so it's available to any device on that network. It also lets you do the opposite and pull an NDI source from the network onto any material in Unreal. So the good thing about NDI is that a lot of venues already use it. So the pro means that you can use a venue's like existing infrastructure, so their network, their hardware, the machines running projectors, with this like zero installation plug and play approach, which is really handy when policies don't always let you just go around installing Unreal Engine on every device at a venue. The con, at least for me, is that I had to render all my visuals off a single machine because I don't have a huge rack of PCs. This meant having a really manageable project and like a good graphics card because I was essentially running 4 projectors just off that one device. What is possible though is using a combination of NDisplay, which requires you to have Unreal Engine installed, and NDI. NDisplay essentially splits out your rendering so you can have multiple machines with render nodes and different graphics cards carrying the weight of that project, but you can still use NDI to then get that out to the machines, for example, running projectors or screens or whatever's going on in the venue. Just because NDI plays nice with things like Touch Designer and Resloom and OBS, which is what a lot of venues use to get things into spaces. So we're nearly at the end, so I just want to zoom out a little bit and get you to think about this question, which is, what is the difference between live broadcast and live performance? I would argue that from a technical point of view, these things can be pretty much the same, at least in terms of having an emphasis on real-time processes. But last year I started my PhD in using motion capture and game engines for live performance, and as part of my research came across this quote, which is, "Without an audience, there is arguably no performance." And this really stuck with me because I think it highlights that one of the main differences between broadcast and performance is not actually technical, it's experiential. Performing is a partnered dance. When you are performing, someone else is audiencing. They have their own rehearsed role, whether it is standing up and facing the front and applauding, whether it's sitting quietly and putting hands up to ask questions, whether it's putting your lighters in the air or singing along or dancing. We know our job often when we come to a live show. We're part of that performance. It implies a relationship between the audience and the performer. So to create something that's engaged with as a live performance, you need to be thinking about the role and experience of the audience just as much, if not more, than the content that you're delivering. And in that sense, designing a performance is a lot more like designing a video game than putting together a TV broadcast. So just lastly, as an example of that, and in odds, I guess, to some of the stuff in this conference, not every problem in Unreal needs a technical solution. And I want to wrap up with an example from the Powerhouse show. So what you're seeing here is a glitch that came up last minute where a random offset just got applied to the skeleton and it would like drop through the floor and it looked like the character had just fallen into the sand. We ran out of time to troubleshoot this. We only found it kind of right at the end. So instead of trying to fix this in Unreal, I just ran with like some impro where I was like, quicksand, help! And then I would get the audience essentially to play along and like pull me out of the sand with the power of their mind. So here's some cosplayers who just happened to be at that gig. And backstage, Emma was literally just dragging the widget up to get my character like back to where she was supposed to be. And a few people mentioned that, hey, this is one of my favorite parts of the show was like the quicksand bit. And I was like, okay. So that's just an example, I guess, of rolling with the punches. And essentially, I think my research at the PhD is more about this. It's more about how the liveness of a show is about the human aspect. And I think Unreal Engine is a really great tool for creating live experiences, not just because it's a technical solution, that lets you do amazing things in real time, but because it's a really flexible, spontaneous tool. It lets you problem solve. It lets you do fun things that you don't have to think of in advance. So I think it's what we do with those human choices and how Unreal lets us make those human choices that makes experiences really live. So that takes me to the end of my presentation. Here are some things I didn't get to. I also didn't get to a lot of stuff around sequencer, around take recorder and time data monitor and a bunch of things. So I would love to throw over to you for the last 5 or 6 minutes if you have any questions. Thank you. Also, thank you very much for coming to a really weird, unusual use of Unreal Engine. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so a DAW, for anyone who is not familiar, is a digital audio workstation. So Ableton is the one I'm using, but it's what musicians generally use to record and perform electronic music. Right now, Unreal doesn't play super nice with audio full stop. Like it's like it doesn't, sometimes it's a bit audio blind. I use OSC essentially, which is another sound protocol, to get information from the DAW into Unreal. Ableton Max for Live is really good at sending out different fun kinds of data. You can do programming in Ableton as well. But the long story short is I'm happy to talk about it more, but the main thing I do is just, use MIDI notes on like a silent track as my cue points throughout songs and things. I translate that into OSC, send it over a network, and then I've got a blueprint set up with an OSC listener that, listens to the velocity and pitch of the note and then like triggers different sequences. So I wish it was actually a little bit easier. It would be great, and I'd love to play around with things like meta sounds as well in the future in that sense. But it has required some creative left brain stuff, and there is really not a lot about it online. So yeah, any other questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll work backwards and let you know how we managed to get everything synced for the live performance after trying like heaps of different options and time code options and sync options. At the end, someone sat there, watched the show, and typed in the delay that they thought was right, which changed throughout the show. Like obviously you're streaming and like data changes speeds in over a 40-minute show. So at the end, literally someone was like manually DJing, adding in delay to like the visuals or the audio or like whatever needed to be synced. That's where we ended up. And to be completely honest, I still haven't found a better solution, which is pretty wild. Time data monitor is the reason I use this. It's a feature in Unreal. It's really great for syncing different kinds of mocap. So what it does let me do is time code my motion capture data, whether it's my face, hands, and gloves, and then sync those 3 things to each other. So at least my mocap can be all in time with each other. What Time Data Monitor doesn't do is deal with live audio. It can take different kinds of time code of recorded audio, for example, or if you're in a physical room, there's some different ways to bring time code into the engine if you're working on a set. But when you're streaming time code over the internet, by nature, that time code is not going to be on time. And it creates all these interesting problems of like, well, what's the source of truth for the time? And there isn't a source of truth because everything is getting streamed. So using eyes and ears ended up being the best solution for this show. The faster I get the audio, the more I can treat that as my source of truth and say that's actually happening in real time, and I'll try and sync to that. But then you end up with all this extra latency by the time you go over NDI to the monitors anyway, and then you have to delay the audio. So still an open question. Time data monitor has been really great for motion capture stuff, but eyes and ears is currently my latency solution, which is pretty wild. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't think so. And because I am using, so the question was about streaming multiple motion capture sources at the same time. I kind of already am because of the whole face, body, hands thing, streaming 3 different unrelated sets of motion capture data. Hypothetically, I could put the face on someone in a different country and they do the face and I do the body, and you can play around with splitting that up however you want. I could animate the band, like that's just adding in more mocap, and it's possible. But at this point, I don't think it's adding more that's tricky. It's more like figuring out like what device is going to crash when I put 3 actors into it, and those sorts of questions. And each of those solutions, whether it was the Live Link Face, Rococo, or Unreal, required a different way to actually send that motion capture data across the network. So like having to remember each of those sort of solutions was another part of it. But yeah, could hypothetically add in like as many people as Unreal can handle streaming from locations all over the world. Again, in a virtual production sense, it doesn't have to be for a live show. It could just be streaming into a project so that your layout editors or whatever can watch that performance in real time. Maybe one last question, and then let's all go have a drink. Anyone got a final one? No? Yeah. Yeah. This is really interesting because I honestly think and there's a bunch of universities here. Actually, do the uni people want to put their hands up? I can see Jason. Yeah, these guys. If you firstly go to the roundtable that's happening and like eyes on people. The great thing is if you find the right people at research institutions, they are looking for research projects, and it is always in the best interest, I think, of universities to show that they're working with industry. So even if you're a well-funded research project, like it can be a really great opportunity to get access to like free mocap stages or, brains or venues or whatever it is. But the big thing is finding the right person. So I was lucky that Dan Thorsland who was the business manager at the Void at the time, was super supportive of this project. Essentially managed to get like an agreement in place with the university to let me use the space. And likewise with UTS, I managed to use the space for free before they were like, you need to do some research or something to keep using it. But the big thing is, the reason I put this here is like, you should do it because it's cool. It can be really difficult to navigate like the ins and outs of, copyright and who wants what and who wants what. But in general, both parties benefit a lot. There should be more of it, especially when it comes to Unreal, because like everything that everyone's doing can be considered research. Research is like extra sources of funding, which everybody needs, and look into like ARC research grants and getting government to match investment. And there's like actually heaps of ways there to get your project funded in ways that maybe you hadn't expected. So that's, I guess, what I wanted to say about that. But I'll let everyone go have a drink. Please feel free to come say hi. I would love to hear about your projects as well. And thank you again for coming to something kind of weird.